and then it was eerily quiet. And then my mind was kind of like, the head in the fishbowl.
Then it takes me into the bathroom and says, this is how you brush your teeth. Brush, rinse, repeat. Brush, rinse, repeat. Brush, rinse, repeat.
But there were 2 girls, and it was like, you'll have to give us a ride. You can't fill us, no. You can't refuse us. He'll let us in his car.
Thoughts were all alone in this empty void, the head in the fishbowl.
This doesn't look right. They got close enough where he said he could see, their eyes and how intelligent they seem. This doesn't look right.
These gremlin-type creatures.
This doesn't look right.
No pupils, no iris. 3 fingers. 3 long fingers. And this is when the mental torture.
And then it was eerily quiet.
The challenges of being a producer are many and vast. Like tonight, for instance, I had to scramble and set up a whole extra microphone and an extra line. And that's okay because that means Mr. Luke Skyrider is with us.
Yes.
I'm back, suckers.
Yes, he's here, the mythical creature himself.
It's time to get your money's worth.
How long has it been?
I don't know, 3 weeks or something.
Oh, dude. There's some shows we don't tell you about just because
I know.
We don't think you'd be interested, and we know you're tired. And
you guys suck and just love to exclude me. Tell the truth.
It's all because we don't invite you.
I send you. Sometimes I'll send you texts. You're like, "What's the topic?" And I'll tell you what it's about. And you're like, "Oh,
I'm good.
I just want to sleep, bro." I mean,
I'm gonna go play DDR instead.
You do have that strenuous job.
Yeah,
so
true.
And it's a full time.
You wouldn't think being a fry guy would be so strenuous,
but you're an important fry guy, my friend.
The life of the fry guy. I asked my manager today if she could make me like fry supervisor so I could feel important too.
Yeah, I get a little name tag that says fry supervisor and it says Luke on it.
We're senior executive fry cook.
Yeah, I like that. I like that. Fry Guy's a little too reminiscent of the those little like bouncing pom poms with legs that the Hamburglar had.
Oh yeah, that's creepy.
Remember the Fry Guy? That's creepy.
Everyone that made the whole McBurglar band or whatever, like
McBurglar band,
they had to have been on acid or something.
Well, what did you have? You got like, of course, Ronald McDonald, which is creepy anyway because he's a clown, right? And you got Grimace, who I don't even know what Grimace is. He's some kind of large purple thing. And
he's a raisin.
Hamburglar, in which he has the little fry guys. And who else? What else was in there? Captain McCheese, who was a big cheeseburger.
Mayor McCheese?
Mayor McCheese. Yeah.
Man, and like even creepier. Even creepier, like, or the listeners know that I'm into like the treasure hunt and going to thrift stores and yard sale, flea markets, etc. Like trying to find valuable old stuff or whatever. And like I've seen so many of those Ronald McDonald dolls like still in the box, like the plush ones with the spaghetti noodle hair and stuff. And on the box, the creepiest thing about it too, it says "Pull my grimace." It's like one of the bulletins on the back of the box. And we're just like scratching our head, like, what's a grimace? How do you pull it? That just makes it even creepier, dude.
Pull my grimace.
Pull my grimace.
Have you seen that band that is, they're called Mac Sabbath? And I guess they're like a Black Sabbath cover band, but they're all dressed up like McDonald's characters.
No. God, no.
I watched them.
It's horrifying.
Yeah.
It really is.
I watched some live footage, and they play it really terribly, too. Yeah.
Yeah, well, I mean, what do you expect?
Well, I was hoping that it would at least be like good covers, that were spot on.
What did they do? It was all just Black Sabbath covers? Because I never actually listened to them. I think they play Nashville sometimes.
Yeah, they
we'll have to go check them out.
They did. They were like,
he goes out with full clown, like Ronald McDonald makeup, and he's like, "We're Black Sabbath."
No, who I really want to see is Les Zeppelin.
Oh, they're really good. They are. I saw them at Mercy Lounge.
Do they make out and stuff like before their set?
Not that I saw.
Oh,
Are you disappointed?
Yeah, bummer.
Or like during their set?
No.
I'm not even a Led Zeppelin fan, really. I just, since they were lesbians. But anyway, continue.
Have you seen the, speaking of clowns, have you seen the new trailer for It?
Yes.
What do you think?
It looks like they just kind of modernized the shots and everything are all real similar. Like I saw a side-by-side comparison of the new trailer versus like those scenes from the old one, and they're really similar. Mm-hmm. Like, I don't know. I'm hoping that the ending is different. Because that'll make it all
the
worthwhile.
ending in the old one was kind of weird,
It
right?
was, which is different than the book, I believe.
The big spider.
Yeah.
Yeah, the book, I don't remember quite what happens in the book.
I don't either, but I'm pretty sure it's different than what the old movie was.
Like, it gets kind of metaphysical and really Lovecraftian at the end of the book. From what I remember.
Yeah.
But, like, what'd you think of the clown, the new Pennywise? Because you're the one I come to, because you're the one that
I'm the
would
clown
be
expert.
frightened by these things.
Well, he was a clown, therefore frightening. Yeah.
Pennywise. I remember the first one. I'm just wondering in this one whether they're going to, are they supposed to like go back to the present day and like it's the 80s? Are they just staying with the kids in this one?
It looked like
how's
it's
it
just
supposed to work?
Looked like it's just a full remake with. I mean, it's just the kids, but in a modern time.
Yeah. Because I thought, in the book, like it goes back and forth between when they're adults to when they're kids. It's like that 30-year difference. And in the original miniseries, it's that way too.
Really, I don't remember that.
So I wonder if they're going to do that, because what I saw in the trailer was just like them as kids,
Right, like the original movie.
and what I'd heard was they're supposed to take place. It's supposed to take place like as adults now, but like it's supposed to be the 80s instead of the 80s and 50s, as it is in the book.
Gotcha.
So, because like Stranger Things, was a little, was a big like kind of like homage to Stephen King. I think one of the kids in Stranger Things is in it. So,
Oh, nice.
yeah, I'm looking forward to that for sure. So, I know we trying to kind of get away from the whole politics stuff, but I'm really kind of curious you guys' thoughts on what happened this week, because this has been like a real crazy, eventful week just passed.
Yeah.
Specifically, the bombing, Trump bombing Syrian government.
Well, we were talking about it a little bit before the show, and Alyssa made some good points. A lot of people are talking about how like calling false flag on it, and I don't think that's what it is. I think that this is an event that genuinely happened, but I think that Trump took the opportunity and to just use it to go in and tried to abolish his ties with Russia at the same time as just using it as a reason to get in there. And I mean, if you look at who profits and who benefits from all of this, like Assad is not, by gassing his own people and incurring what he knew would happen, the wrath of America. Like he has nothing to gain from it, unless you paint him as someone who's just completely psychotic and has no idea what's going on, which I doubt.
Yeah.
I don't know. It just seems like more like a terrorist faction would do this to set us off and try to get us to poke Russia and stir things up. And
Well, like the Russians are saying that what they think happened was, and first of all, they're calling for like an investigation before anybody does anything.
which we should have probably done.
Right.
Yeah.
Find out who it is and who was involved. But they're saying that, and I happen to agree with this, that there was probably a depot there in that town, and probably the rebels were working on some kind of gas. And when the government bombed the town, Assad's government bombed the town, what they hit the place and it got out and got released into the air, and then everybody got sick and people died. I mean, pretty horrifying images. Like you saw that one of the guy holding his two like twin babies that were dead, and just, you know, horrible. So I mean, it's a horrible thing. And that war has been, like I've said many times before, it's been horrible for the last 6 years. Luke, what do you think before I go on?
Man, all
Been
I
following
can,
in it?
yeah, I have. The only thing I could say is I agree with his decision, provided it was a real attack and not like what Rob's saying, false flag. I mean, I agree. You know, we the time before we said, you know, don't do that again. You know, don't attack your own people or whatever. We're gonna have to step in and interfere, and they did it again. So suffer the consequence.
Well, the problem with that is in 2013, when the last gas attack happened, and that was blamed on the Syrian government. You know, two things happened. You had an investigation into it, and also the Russians got Assad to store his chemical weapons and give them up. And that was a big news. Like through the UN, they did that. And then there were UN investigators that went in and said that it wasn't the Assad government that did it, it was the rebels.
Right. And this time, the same thing happened again, but there was no investigation. We just instantly went to drastic measures.
Shoot 59 cruise missiles in there. And we warned the Russians. We told them an hour ahead of time, which has sparked a lot of conspiracy theories in that way, too, about how this is like a agreement between Putin and Trump to make Trump look good, to make it look like we're actually at loggerheads with the Russians when we really aren't. But I've been hearing today, and I haven't seen any like real trustworthy news sources report this, but like Iran and Russia have already said, you know, don't attack Syria, the Syrian government forces, or there's going to be consequences. So, I mean, this is like potentially really serious stuff. Like, this could really be something that could really escalate. And like I've said, the Syrian civil war has been just this black hole that has sucked all these countries in, and it could really spark off a major conflict.
You think it's true that we in the targeted, or what do you call it, contained bombing, you know, that we actually did kill the ISIS recruitment leader? You know, I saw headlines for that. Do you think that's true?
Or were you talking about the one that just happened?
Yeah.
That wasn't against ISIS.
Well,
that was against the Syrian government.
I know, but
ISIS is fighting, by the way.
They were saying that they killed some kind of ISIS recruiter in the attack, like the one for U.S., like some big one that was recruiting people from the U.S.
Oh, I have no idea. I haven't heard about this.
Oh,
I really don't know.
Might just be fake news. I don't know.
Well, there's things happening over there all the time. I mean, the whole thing is so complicated, right? I mean, we talked about this before. You got ISIS, you got the Syrian government under Assad, you've got the supposed non-religious opposition forces, you've got al-Nusra, which is basically an offshoot of Al-Qaeda that doesn't like ISIS, and then you got the Kurds in the north, and then you got the Turks doing whatever they're doing. And I don't know. I have to wonder here if there may be some kind of a deal going on with the Russians, because Michael Flynn, the former national security advisor now, was, you know, he retired. He left that post because he had been speaking to the Russian ambassador. Well, I mean, what if there was some kind of deal that was made where we would be allowed to topple Assad, and then maybe we'd both go after ISIS and maybe leave Russia free hand in the Ukraine? But I don't know. I mean, as far as I can tell at the moment, it looks like we're going after the Assad government that Russia supports, and that's dangerous in my opinion. This is exactly what I thought Trump wouldn't do.
Right? Where you're saying this is the one thing that you liked about him in the past was his wanting to improve foreign relations.
But is this somehow a way to do that and to say like, hey, we're not going to be bullied. We're not going to be pushed around. I don't know. But just shooting those missiles off like that without any kind of confirmation on what exactly happened.
Well, it amazes me how many people are like, oh, he didn't even get congressional approval. Like, well, we haven't needed that for 16 years. We haven't needed that since 9/11.
Right.
Like, and that seems like it's a big news to people.
Right.
We gave that right up a long time ago.
Right.
Congress hasn't actually declared war since 1941. Okay. Since World War II.
Yeah, it definitely seems like there's some kind of missing information that we're all lacking here.
Right.
In the mix on the confusion of everything that's going on.
And you got Nikki Haley at the UN. She's the UN ambassador, and she's saying, you know, there's going to be more strikes against Assad. And then the Russians are saying, no, you can't do that. You know, we're going to support him. But yet, you know, we still gave the Russians time to get the hell out of Dodge, and Syrian government forces to get the hell out of Dodge before they got bombed. And there was like 6 people that got killed in the, so far I've heard 6, I've heard 9, you know, I've heard a few different, but it was definitely in the single digits of people that got killed. But still though, you know, the tragedy is a tragedy no matter what. And then not to mention all the other things that happened last week. Well, look what happened today. I mean, you know, ISIS blew up a church in Egypt, a Coptic church. They were having a Palm Sunday service. Bombed it, blew it up, taking full credit for it. The same day that the Trump sent his missiles over to Syria, there was that truck bomb in the guy that ran people over with a truck in Stockholm in Sweden. It was the same thing that the guy did in London. And before that, like earlier in the week, you had the bombing in the St. Petersburg subway system. Which you didn't hear very much vocal support about that, did you? Saying, oh, we're all Russia now. Even though there was like 15, 20 people that died in that. You didn't see anybody changing their Facebook profile to the Russian flag, even though people died. Yeah. Well, it just got covered up because so many things happened. So are these things connected? Was that connected? And then on the ground there in Syria, where this rebel group is basically losing and Assad's making gains against them, all of a sudden there's, I suppose, a chemical attack when he had absolutely no reason to do anything like that. It would hurt him more than it would help him. And it definitely has, because now the U.S. is saying we want him out. I just want to know where Trump changed his mind. You can't tell me it's because he didn't, you know, it's because those babies that he saw that being killed. Did somebody find the piss tape? Honestly, man. I mean, this shit's scary, bro.
Yeah.
It's scary. I mean, worst case scenario, we get into some kind of, the best case scenario is we get into some kind of localized war with Russia. And the worst case scenario is like thermonuclear war. So I don't really know, you know, where it goes from there. I mean, And then North Korea sending out the there's a carrier task force group going out to North Korea. And like, so Russians were saying that North Korea has the ability to bomb the United States. And so Trump is sending this carrier task force to do something about North Korea.
Oh, jeez.
It's like, what's about to happen?
I don't care. I love it. There's my mentality.
I don't know, man.
Dude, you're going a dark direction with this.
Where do you go?
We all need to occupy ourselves with distractions and just like not even worry about it and just go back to sleep.
Yeah, exactly. There you go. Just start sleeping. Well, happiness. So, anything else that concerns you guys?
I grilled some nice burgers for dinner.
Yes, you did. Yes, you did.
Dude, they look fire.
Those were good, man.
Thank you.
Those really were good.
And gluten-free friggin' noodles, rice noodles, brown rice, organic,
gluten-free brown rice,
pasta,
mac and cheese.
Mm-hmm. I mean, next week we might be eating lizard, so eat while you can.
Just be grilling up whatever I catch in the backyard.
Lizard or cat.
Got a lot of squirrels around here. They'll go first.
Yeah, it's true. All right. Well, in case apocalypse doesn't happen, Rob, tell everybody about our Patreon and how they can find it and sign up for it.
Yeah, well, we've got a lot of new Patreon members. First, we would like to thank you all. And anyone else that wants to join up, it's patreon.com/Conspirinormal. There's different tiers you can subscribe to. You can get our monthly special bonus episodes. There's all the way up to like free wallpapers, Conspirinormal t-shirt, whatever you feel like contributing. There's different tiers there. And yeah, it's a lot of fun. We're going to start doing like monthly Skype calls with all of you guys. Yeah. Mm-hmm.
At the highest tier, if you donate 100 or more, you get a personal date with Adam.
No, you get a personal date with Luke.
no, Adam.
How about your pick?
Personal date with hot girls only. Okay,
you can't go on a date with me.
You can't say that to anyone.
It has to be you.
That's true. I'm the only one that's single here, right?
And ladies, he has a beard that looks magnificent now.
It is looking glorious.
Do I look like a bard? Is it like
a little bit?
I don't think I could. Do you think I could get to Randall Carlson status with the beard
in a few years?
In a few years,
dude. Yeah. I feel like you need a cup of bourbon, just like sitting on a stool reading poetry right now.
Well, thank you, Luke. On that note, guys, we do have Thad McKraken coming back on. We're going to talk about his book, Transmissions from Outside of Time. And as always with that, we think it'll be a roller coaster ride. So
it'll be enlightening as hell, I'm sure.
So get ready, guys, for some enlightenment and some ganja-tating, and we'll be right back on Conspirinormal.
What if I were to tell you that the forms are not the facts? And what if I were to ask you the shape of water? Water is in a state of constant flow and flux, a paradox of weakness and strength. My name is Aaron David, and I am host of Charm the Water, a weekly podcast centering on the occult and mysticism, based in Asheville, North Carolina. You can find us at charmthewater.com or iTunes, Google Play, Stitcher, your favorite pod feeder. Come holler.
All right, guys, we're back on Conspirinormal, and we have the guest on the line. And this is a guest that I think may have been one of the more controversial guests that we've had. We had him back on in, I want to say October of 2014, talking about his first book, Galactic Dialogues. And then we had him on to talk about some of his viewpoint on Pizzagate. And I got so many emails and complaints about that one. It wasn't even funny.
Oh, geez, really? Here's the thing. It's like I even posted that on my Facebook page, and I even said like, no, I'm not talking about this anymore. Like, because already by that point that I'm on the show, I was so sick of discussing it with like fans in my writing, because every time I posted something, it would just go. I mean, people really, really wanted to believe in Pizzagate, and they really didn't like there's really not much evidence there. Not only that, you're accusing innocent people of pedophilia and trying to intentionally ruin their businesses, which of course Alex Jones has now apologized for, only because there was a lawsuit, by the way. And I just like, when he did apologize about that, I was like, I looked at the fine print. I'm like, no, he didn't actually feel bad about, a bunch of people getting harassed and accused of being pedophiles publicly. Innocent businesses getting harassed and, and intentional propaganda campaigns against them. Like, I don't care about, damaging innocent people, but, I'm going to apologize because of a lawsuit. So what are you going to do?
I'm already going to see the emails come in.
Yes,
and like the first 30 seconds, just as soon as we mention Pizzagate, that's when it's when the emails are coming. I didn't know that about Alex Jones, though, that he said that he retracted it, but I didn't know that he was getting sued, and that's why he did it.
He apologized to James Alefantis, the owner of Comet Ping Pong. But yeah, if you look at the fine print, James Alefantis was threatening with a lawsuit, which is why he publicly apologized. It wasn't because he felt bad, and that's just who Alex Jones is.
So did Alefantis drop the lawsuit?
I think so. I mean, I'm not sure if there was really much of a lawsuit there or not. I think he just was sort of like angling for an apology, which he got. So I mean, as far as I can tell. Then again, this is based on what information, probably some random crap I read online. So that was at least something I read was saying that was the reason.
Right.
So, but yes, I agree. How controversial that was mind-boggling to me. And like I said, I posted this and I didn't even chat about it. Like I just posted and even said, like, I'm not even talking about this because I'm so sick of talking about it at this point.
Well,
and then somebody else posted something on my page, and like I went in like 4 days later, there were still people arguing on it. Like I hadn't even touched the conversation, and I'm like, hey, what's going on my Facebook page? Oh, people are still arguing about this thing. It was like a cracked piece talking about how dumb Beatsgate is, and somebody posted that on my page, and that discussion continued for nearly a week. And this is like a month after I'd intentionally stopped talking. So yes, the controversy there, my mind is blown by it anyways. Okay.
Well, I have my own thoughts about it, but like, I'm sick of talking about it too. And then also I just got, I'm going to say at least about 3 or 4 emails. It wasn't like a torrent or anything.
Yeah.
But it was just kind of like, why didn't you challenge him? This kind of stuff. Well, because like we don't challenge our guests. We're not there to tell them they're wrong. We're here to listen to them, and you had a different viewpoint than anybody else that I had on the show about it, and I appreciate the viewpoint.
Just to establish, by the way, Alex Jones did in fact apologize for this at this point, so my viewpoint a tad legit. Maybe all these people that were a tad mad at what I was saying, I think I was saying something that was fairly accurate. Now, I do want to say, when I like wrote the piece that I wrote about Pizzagate, I didn't see, it was all about Comet Ping Pong, the stuff that I saw. And that was my main point, is that there was nothing involved in Comet Ping Pong. Afterwards, I looked at some other things, and it did seem like there was some coded emails going on in Podesta that had nothing to do with Comet Ping Pong whatsoever. And I will confess, yes, I saw some emails where coded language was being used. I think pretending to understand exactly what that coded language means is, I don't know. I'm like, I don't think you can really connect the dots and saying, oh, hey, there's some coded language in a couple emails. And then you can furthermore say, well, that means child sex trafficking. I think that could mean drugs or regular prostitution or a lot of other, who knows? It could be like a code for art, I don't know. But I will say, after I looked at that, there was some emails, but I think that I was pretty much justified and 100% right that there was really no connection to Comet Ping Pong. And all of the emails that involved Comet Ping Pong involved actual pizza. That was pretty obvious. And there was just the culture of people artists being harassed for the kind of art they like. Is just, we're getting into some witch hunt stuff that really, as an artist, really bothered me at my core, which is part of the reason I was writing about it in the first place.
Well, that we talked about it on the last show, and I don't want to belabor this point too much.
Yeah, exactly. I agree.
We talked about on the last show about this girl that came on Dr. Phil. Have you heard about this?
No.
It was this girl that came on Dr. Phil, calling herself Kendall, and said that she had been sex trafficked, that she was sold by her parents at like the age of 1 or 2. And it was Luke's girlfriend that actually keyed me into this, that this girl had gone on this show. And she said that she had been pregnant like maybe a bunch of times in her life, like 3 times a year or just something ridiculous like that. And like the babies had been given to the sex traffickers. And it was very reminiscent of like the alien abduction stuff and the satanic ritual abuse stuff. And so like now, you're getting this whole thing where, there is I definitely see the witch hunt mentality aspect to this.
Well, yeah. And you're talking about it. Yeah, I agree. And that's, I had so many discussions about this stuff. And this is what I had to point out. Like when you make the argument, but sex trafficking does happen, that's like saying, well, murders happen. So Adam, I guess you're a murderer. I mean, hey, I just proved you're a murderer. And that's what people didn't get about the comic ping pong. It's like, okay, I don't deny that sex trafficking has happened. It happens all the time. I mean, this is like why Craigslist took down their sex ads, years ago, because and this is everywhere though. And what annoys me is this idea that it's just elites doing it. And then somehow it's just the Hollywood, because it fits this narrative that I think, conspiracy theory type people want to fit. And it's mainly Christian propaganda, let's face it, the evil occult and the evil elites in Hollywood, just kind of playing off people's misery. And my point is, this stuff happens everywhere. In every community that you go to, there is sex trafficking going on, and it's sad. It's like this problem is a lot worse than you're acknowledging. It's like this goes on everywhere. It's not just elites. And weirdly enough, yes, I think some elites are even involved with this stuff, but I've seen no evidence that elites are involved in it at any higher degree than anyone else. It's just like if elites are involved with it, it's just like, well, so is every other subset of the population, essentially. So is there any evidence that the few, say, Hollywood elites or famous people, essentially, when we're talking about elites, are involved at even any higher rate than the Catholic Church or, or just any other segment of the population? Because this is so widespread. And I even have a cousin on my wife's side who's he's a hardcore evangelical Christian who's, like anti-gay and anti-abortion and stuff like that. But what he does, I mean, he's kind of from a wealthy kid from a wealthy family, and he runs this charity rescuing women from sex trafficking, and right. He has never told me once that this involved like elite people. Like this happens. It's so much. And so that was another thing that frustrated me about this scandal. It's like, oh, but what about the kids? And like, well, I get it. Yes, sex trafficking happens. It even happens among elites. I would never even argue these things. But at the same time, it's like you're just accusing innocent people. And not only that, you're accusing them of witchcraft because of the art that they're making, which is even weirder. And there was such a clear political motive for what was going on with that, too. So it annoys me. And I've had so many of these discussions. It's like, yeah, I mean, my problem is you don't really care about the kids. Why, if you really care about sex trafficking, why not see how it's going on in your community and trying to stop it? Because it's there. You don't have to look to Hollywood. You don't have to look to Washington, D.C. It's there. So anyways. Yeah.
I heard a Christian podcaster even say, well, like he was kind of, when it was first getting started, and he was getting a little frustrated because he was saying, well, now everybody's focused on this. And he said, since you guys are all focused on this Pizzagate thing,
exactly.
He said there are real things going on. There are real groups, because he said he had somebody that was that had a ministry that worked with the people that had been trafficked and was trying to prevent sex trafficking in their community. And he said, like, it was like tumbleweeds blowing through when people on downloads. But once the Pizzagate stuff happened, it was like it just blew up. So he said, if you're really interested in helping, throw these people some money or try to get active in your community. So I definitely, I think there's a frustration there too among a lot of Christian groups as well.
Weirdly, I talk about synchronicity a lot too, and I think it was actually before all this broke. And back in December, I was on I went to jury duty for the second time in my life, and I almost got a case. And what did the case involve? Sex trafficking out in the Seattle suburbs. So this is my point. It's like this is going on all over the place. And yes, I do think some elites are involved with it, but like it's a really widespread problem that affects every subset. Saying it's occultists that are involved in it, and weirdly enough, there even was an occult sex trafficking ring busted in the UK back, I don't know, I think 5 or 6 years ago. It involved a lot of people that was in the chaos magic scene, and even then though, it's just like, yeah, but this is one, nobody cared, even though there was actually, this is like the holy grail for like Illuminati conspiracy theorists, is like this, occult Crowley themed, sex trafficking ring that was operating in the UK. But nobody really, conspiracy theorists really cared because it wasn't the elites, They were just some, backwater dudes in like some small town in Scotland, and so nobody really gave a crap because
some creepy people and living in some like rundown shack. And that's like, but the thing is like, that's not sensational enough.
Exactly.
That's not sexy enough. Okay.
It was like a Hollywood story, and that's why like Pizzagate was. I even said this, I think, in a follow-up piece because I didn't want to write about this again, and I think I wrote at least one more piece about it because I just couldn't believe the reaction that I got into it, and that's exactly what I said. It's like, this is, as somebody who's been practicing, magic for years now, it's just like, this is not what you think it is. Like, it was a piece just like explaining that, it's so much more widespread, and this is a Hollywood version, essentially. Like, this is what, if it was a bad Hollywood writer who was writing for CSI, like that, like CSI might, Washington DC, if they had that, that's like the occult plot line he would come up with, is that a politician is involved. It's like Eyes Wide Shut crap, but that's it. It's Hollywood story, man. Like, that's why it's so sensational. It's like, that wasn't real. Like, they weren't running a sex trafficking ring out of a pizza shop where all these alternative bands were all, involved in this massive cover up. And, it's like, no, that wasn't. And still, maybe there is. I'm sure there is sex trafficking going on in Washington D.C. I seeing as the rates for male prostitutes absolutely spike, like when there's a Republican convention in Cleveland. Like, I bet that this like, that's just true. These are just true. Like, I guarantee there is, but like, I'm sorry, it didn't involve Comet Ping Pong, and they weren't satanic. There was no evidence linking any of this stuff to the occult. So it was just, that entire narrative was just fiction. And you're right, it would make a great Hollywood show, which is why people liked it so much. People wanted it to be true. That's what I found so weird, is people so wanted that to be true. They so did.
I'm sure Ancient Aliens will find a link, and they'll
exactly.
It'll be a whole big thing on History Channel. Giorgio
exactly
Tsoukalos will be like Pizzagate was. I'm not saying it was aliens, but it was aliens.
Yeah, well, exactly why Ancient Aliens make so much money in the actual UFO stuff. Nobody likes the answer, like, something weird's going on, but nobody really knows what it is. And it seems to have to do with like spirituality more than aliens. Nobody really likes that answer. They like it's aliens, and they were here. They like specifics. They don't like the ambiguity and the strangeness. So UFO stuff, it falls into the same sort of trap. People fall into these really bizarre sensational stories, which I find weird because when you read the details of UFO stories, they're so weird and sensational. Like, I just read like Whitley Strieber's book with Jeffrey Cripple, like a year ago, and
Supernatural.
And I had forgotten like how utterly insane Whitley Strieber's sex magic stories are. Like his stories of these alien. I'd read this all stuff like a decade ago, and you read this stuff again, it's like he has weirder sex magic stories than any other magician I've ever read, or anybody that's into this spirituality. And this stuff is really weird. So, but you're right. It points to this ambiguous kind of spiritual dimension rather than the narrative of, yes, there are UFOs that are trying to take us over, and we know, and so people don't like it as much.
It's the reptilians, man. It's all the reptilians.
Exactly. The reptilians,
so,
for sure.
Thad, it's been a while since we had you to talk about your stuff and your material.
Indeed.
Into 2014 was the last time. I think Rob had just joined us at that point.
Yes. Actually, I missed that show because it was like, I was sort of off and on at that point. I was just sort of helping you out still.
Yeah, that was back in the day, man.
Yeah, it's been a while, man.
It was like episode 64, if memory serves, or maybe it was something a little later. But let's talk about, let's give like a recap of what you experienced to get to the point where you wrote this new book.
Okay, yeah. So, just to give a bit of a recap, so let me sum it up as quickly as I can. First of all, I had started experimenting with astral projection when I was 18 years old, and I got into that because of psychedelic drugs. Like my experiences that I had with psychedelic drugs, like just immediately turned me into a person that was like reading all kinds of stuff about remote viewing and aliens, and then shamanism and the occult, and it sort of changed my personality because what I experienced was so weird. I was from somebody who had kind of just rejected Christianity to somebody that then was like, this is my thing. I was basically reading as much as I can and trying these things to these alternative spiritual practices try and explain to me, why there's, transdimensional aliens in my head when I take psychedelic drugs, and I even got a degree in psychology, trying to learn this stuff. So after dealing with astral projection for years, and having these utterly bizarre experiences, since it so went against my Christian materialistic upbringing, I just refused to accept it. And then at a point where I was really low in my life, some sort of spirit entity like showed up in my room and sort of clapped its hands and awoken me to the idea that I should be pursuing, trying to be a magician or a sorcerer or a mystic or whatever you want to call it, and started pointing out to me, it's like, look, you have these abilities, you can use them to your advantage. You don't have to, these are not, you're like ashamed of this stuff because it doesn't fit into your culture, and you could really use this to better your life. You should be proud of the fact that you have these kind of talents and abilities. And so my life completely kind of turned around. I went from being like the lowest point in my life to instantly getting a way better job, like meeting the woman who ended up being my wife. And so that's my first book is about that. And of course, there's a lot of other weird galactic dialogue, occult initiations. There's a lot of other weird experiences, like me inducing an ancient god in my wife during a sex magic transmission, which documented in her book. So it's this thing of, it's like, is this just in my head? Because all of a sudden she's telling me things, which she wrote this section of her book and she had this experience. So it's blurring the line. And so leading up to this book, in my last book, I realized that in the occult, there's this practice of knowledge and conversation with your holy guardian angel. This, according to magicians like a Brahmalan, this is what you're trying to attain. And around 2010 or so, I had sort of realized that I had attained this. Like I had all of a sudden, like I was suddenly channeling and having a dialogue with kind of my what people refer to as, this is, I think, what people refer to aliens as, in all honesty. I can call it your holy guardian alien. And in one particular experience where it showed up and it projected a vision of the Holy Trinity into my mind and showed me how there's the higher part of yourself, which you want to call your holy guardian angel or your just guardian entities, exist outside of the time stream, and that we exist inside of the time stream. So that'd be sort of the father or mother. And then you inside the time stream would be kind of the son or daughter. And then the Holy Spirit, what that represents is the interconnectedness of consciousness, that on this level, they're looking at time as a singular object. And as a singular object, it's all connected by this force that we refer to as the Holy Spirit. And again, I grew up a Christian. I said, the Lord's Prayer, and I referenced the Holy Trinity every time I went to church. And this entity was sort of explaining, like, here's a detailed explanation of what that actually means. And that gets even weirder because Graham Hancock included me in a book called The Divine Spark, and I talk a lot about synchronicity. And there's another article in that very book, that compilation, that is about how this concept of the Holy Trinity exists in every tradition, basically, that we've been able to find. Every spiritual tradition has this concept. So it, again, was a little more credence to this vision that I had. And so then after that, after I realized, it probably had been going on for a while, where I realized that I'd initiated this knowledge and conversation with my holy guardian angel, that I just started documenting it. And it was also right around the time where disinfo.com picked up my writing. And so people were starting to friend me on that because of that. So I started keeping a log of these communications that I was having. It was kind of when I started becoming more of a spirit medium. And what's super compelling about this book is that it's one thing to say, this is crazy, it's all in your head. But when I started documenting this stuff, and as you would see in my new book, Transmissions from Out of Time, that a lot of it ended up checking out in reality. In fact, one example of that is, I think the third time I actually posted one of these visions online, it was about my uncle and him being in this guy, my uncle, who I don't really talk to very much at all, and him being in a dire headspace. And a year later, I found out that he had actually OD'd on nitrous oxide. And yeah, exactly. And something I didn't even know was possible. And so he ended up going to rehab. He nearly died. And so like the third time that I post something online, it turns out that, I was actually, that wasn't just random. Like, and it's like a very specific thing. Like, I'm sensed that something is off with the mental state of this very specific uncle who I haven't talked to in years. And sure enough, a year later, I find out that I was 100% right about that. And there's 3 or 4 examples. So this book is kind of a year in the life, and it also traces some of the writing I was doing for Disinfo back then. So it's kind of like a year in the life in 2013, and it's kind of about how how inner and outer states of consciousness are related, and it's maybe more about precognitive dreaming and the potentiality of that than anything else.
So why did you call 2013 in the book The Year of the Witch?
That was a weird thing. So this is a story I've never really told on a podcast. This is going to come out in a further book. So the 2012 thing, I was always, my position in this has always been that I never thought any kind of apocalypse or anything was going to happen. But because of the Mayans, I sort of thought potentially that maybe, I wasn't just going to discount being into mysticism. I wasn't going to discount the fact that possibly Mayan shamans were onto something with this. And of course, if you look at the world as being made of linguistics and people in the counterculture, because of Daniel Pinchback and Terence McKenna and Grant Morrison, had kind of embedded this 2012 thing into the counterculture. So that year I did probably my first acid ritual where I took LSD and I've tripped recreationally a bunch of times and even sort of recreationally, but I set aside a day and I was like, I'm going to do a ritual to basically try and get I was more working on music then, and my music and my writing out to kind of a wider audience. And so I did it, and it was weirdly successful. And there are a couple of weird things. At one point, I had a pretty profound vision during this that I was a monkey, and it was like I've seen the perspective from the spirit world, and they were looking at me, and I was just like this monkey, like throwing my arms up, and they were like, "What else do I have to do?" Like I've been making records, it's like I got books like, "What else do I have to do?" Like to like get this, and so it was a very weird. Not only that, but here's where it gets stranger. During this ritual that I did, I also realized, like during the middle of the ritual, I was like, "Oh shit. This is going to do something spiritually. Like I'm activating something." And I knew it. I was like, I am activating something that's going to be very weird. Like I realized like what I'm doing is working, and it's going to activate something and I almost like wasn't prepared for that. Like you don't even expect this kind of thing to actually work, but I could feel it. It was like, this is I just activated something that I don't even know if I'm even prepared for. So not long after that, and I did this in, I don't know, February or March. I wish I would have written it down back in 2012. So I did this ritual. And about a week later, as I'm meditating, or kind of before I go to bed, this kind of black mist entity showed up and tried to pull me out of my body. And it showed me, at first it showed up as my naked wife. That's what's sort of hilarious. It like projects itself to me as an image of my naked wife. And it tries to pull me up and
trying to lure you in,
exactly.
Make you feel comfortable. Yeah.
That's exactly it. And so it tried to lure me in, and it tried to pull me out of my body and then it actually told me, it went next to me and it kind of focused into my vision and said, like communion with your holy guardian angel, which is, straight up alien abduction. Right. And this is so funny. They even use the word communion. So it's like, this would be the next step in your process. You've done the knowledge and conversation with your holy guardian, and now it's time to ascend to the communion. And so I write about this in Transmissions from Out of Time. And so right after this happened, and so it's so funny because it came to me as my naked wife several times and started coming to me as these different things. I know one point it like came to me as this one girl that I had, a naked girl that I had a particular crush on, which I was like, it was just sort of hilarious. It's like, well, good try. That was nice. But and so
see, this almost sounds like a succubus kind of thing.
Oh yeah, no,
going on here.
I had this kind of thing happen with me in astral projection when I started. This is part of why I stopped trying to experiment with this, because we like to think as incubus, succubus experiences as being just stuff that people made up, but it's not. It's you achieve these sleep paralysis state, and these kind of things happen. And when I started experimenting with astral projection, this is the kind of thing I didn't. I was reading Robert Monroe's books and using his techniques, and he never mentioned this kind of thing. So, but basically though, I suck, and I couldn't do this communion with the holy guardian angel thing because they kept trying to pull me out of my body, but it's just so weird. I mean, you guys have listened to like people talk about alien abductions, and it's just a sensation of getting pulled out of your body. It's just every time it got so strange that it's like your fear response kicks in and it just sucks me back into my body every time. And this went on for a good nearly 2 years. I was having constant experiences with these entities trying to reach down and pull me up and give me this kind of like alien classic, angelic abduction encounter. And I couldn't do it. And it just stopped happening a while ago. And I didn't realize until I was reading because I now keep a pretty detailed magic journal, and it was realized eventually I went back, and the explanation I was given for why it kept happening is that these things were actually just as afraid of me as I was of them, and that was part of the problem. So it wasn't necessarily even my fear; it's that these entities were actually sort of terrified for me. So after a while, they just gave up. But so it's interesting. So it was I initiated this process, but anyways, that was a long rant, and so back to 2012. So I did this spell. to, I wanted my stuff to get out to a wider audience. I had written a book that I was now in the process of editing, and my music, I had just finished an album with the band and it ended up breaking up. So then weirdly enough, it didn't seem to work, although, more people did check out that record than pretty much everything that I also did with my band. And so it got really good reviews too, but it's not like I was huge or making money. I kind of made the recording costs back, but it was so the album was in fact the best thing I'd ever done. But then literally a week after December 21st, 2012, Disinfo picked up my writing, like a week. And then it did instantly start reaching a much wider audience than it had before. Before I was writing for much smaller websites. So that was pretty trippy that I did that. And then literally a week after December 21st, 2012, my writing does get picked up and goes to a bigger website. So the Year of the Witch thing was sort of like, okay, if you're going to base your idea, buy into this idea that possibly some sort of spiritual transformation was initiated in 2012, that the next year would be the Year of the Witch and the kind of power of feminine entities coming back. And it came from a witch named Pam Grossman, who writes a great blog called The Phantasma File. And weirdly enough, after I started using it, she ended up getting an article written, I believe, in the Huntington Post that got read 20,000 times or something about this concept. So it was I borrowed it from her, and then because I was using it, I think that she ended up writing this large article about it. So, anyways. More questions?
I just wanted to tell you too that the story about the entity telling you to brush your teeth.
Oh yeah,
That's actually one of our sound bites in our new theme song.
Yeah, man. I've got.
I had to include that.
I hate. I'm not supposed to use the F word, but I hate China. Yeah, man, that's a weird story. Yeah, no, and I have. This is partially when I was talking about Pizzagate. It's this is why I think some of your friends would be like, why does this guy have a perspective on this kind of thing? And you're talking about manipulating demonic entities and whatnot, and I've been doing this for years. I have more stories with this kind of stuff, so I actually think I'm a tad more qualified than most people. You're accusing these people of doing these occult rituals, and these things that you think are demonic forms of entity, they're not even what you think they are. You really can't think about these things in terms of good and evil or right and wrong. That's just not. It's not the way it works.
You said something interesting there, that they said that they were as scared as you were, or scared of you. Were they scared of you or scared for you?
Scared of me is what I was told. Yeah. And what's so funny is it stopped happening, and then I wondered why. And then I didn't realize until I was going through my journals that I had an experience where it was explained to me. So it's why you keep a magic journal. So you're going back and you're like, oh, this was actually explained to me, why? And I wrote it down.
So what was the reason why that they're scared of us? Because when I think of these in these terms, I think of maybe something that is maybe a little more advanced than us. And it's almost like it would look at us like a cockroach. But I guess, is it the kind of effect of where, say, there's a wasp in the room, and I remember when I was growing up, if there was a bee or a bumblebee, and I would be so scared of it, and my dad will say, "Well, it's probably just as scared as you as you are of it." So is it that same kind of concept?
Truth, I don't know if they would be scared of anyone, but I was summoned into this for some weird reason. So I think there's something about me in particular. And if I were to theorize, who knows? Yeah, there's something about why do these things talk to me in the first place? Yeah, I've had to recently accept the fact, I'm essentially telling stories here, and how many guests do you have on that tell stories this weird? This is what I've dealt with, because I write books, and weirdly enough, as far as the occult scene and whatnot, what I do has nothing in common with that stuff at all. I've had to accept the fact that I'm a spirit medium, which is a weird thing to accept. And I've had a lot of experiences recently where, it's just straight, I get told things, they end up checking out in real life, I'm predicting the future. Some of it has involved people that I've known who have died, so it's just something I've had to accept. And the story of how I had to accept this, because I would have never thought, I'm someone, especially because there's so much fraud among people that claim they're spirit mediums. If you look at Long Island medium, please, the second anyone starts doing,
you mean she's not real?
the second anyone starts doing like cold reading or what John Edwards, like, come on, like the second anyone starts doing cold reading bullshit, like you can pretty much, and what's so funny is I think maybe some of these people do have legit abilities, but it's just, it's a fraud. Like this stuff is not as consistent as it would have to be to fit into a capitalist system. I don't think there's anybody that can literally just have anyone come in off the street and then like summon up a spirit that's going to help that exact person. I don't think anybody is that good at this stuff. And that's been sort of my experience. Sure. And that's just kind of unfortunate with spirituality and esoteric spirituality and capitalism in general, is that the people that come to the top end up being frauds, because essentially to sell people on the idea that they can do things for free that will benefit them enormously doesn't really fit into capitalism. The fact that you can use your own imagination to have better experiences than you're ever going to, have buying $1 million mansion or having a cocaine orgy or whatever like that. This idea is so completely unacceptable. It goes in the complete counter to capitalism, which is why I think back in the day, it's unfortunate that's not really what the counterculture is anymore at all. But that, it runs completely counter to capitalism. So I think to a large extent, to fit into capitalism, and the people that are going to rise up are basically going to have to lie. Like you have to kind of oversell people and say, "Oh, I've got the secret. I've got the answer." You gotta kind of be, you gotta give people easy answers. And that's why, one of the more, and people even sort of called me out, which, and it's a valid point. Some of the writing that I did for Disinfo, some of the more popular writing that I did was just like pointing out how fraudulent a lot of your countercultural icons actually were. And, even people like kind of called me out for, because I did get a point where I did like 3 or 4 pieces on different writers like Castaneda and, Crowley and even McKenna. I'm sorry, like as much as I love Terrence McKenna, he had a bad trip on mushrooms and never took them again for like the final 15 years of his life. Then he died of a mushroom-sized tattoo on his head. And what's so funny is like, I don't like people like, you're right. It got like a bit repetitive for even me. And yet I was just like, I was learning this stuff. The reason I was writing these posts is because I didn't know this stuff. It's like this is the internet. There's like this information is out here now to a lot of extent. And I always looked up to all these people, and it was a shock to me to realize like, wow, most of these people are rather fraudulent. Even Robert Anton Wilson, who was a huge influence on me, it's like I honestly disagree with that guy on like at least half of the stuff that he talks about. I think he's like half right about stuff, and then I disagree with him on a lot of fundamental principles. So and I think the reason being and why we haven't had good countercultural icons in the last decade or so is because one, back in the 60s, people would actually sign authors that wrote about this kind of thing, and also it's just it goes. How do you sell anti-capitalism to capitalism? Yeah,
we talked about Castaneda with one of our guests that we had on, and there's some question. Like I think Adam Gorightly has written an article about this. There's some question whether Castaneda actually did the things that he said he did and met Don Juan, and whether Don Juan was an actual real person or it was just some device that he made up to,
Yeah, no, he was
to
a fraud.
Explain his philosophy. Yeah.
I don't think there's really any maybe there. He was a fraud, and if you're looking for sources on that, it's pretty much his followers. Not only that, but people caught. No, his followers straight up told. If you read interviews, they're like, he told us that his works were fiction. And they were, and yet, I still think Carlos, I would recommend his books to anybody, and they were a huge influence on me when I was a kid.
Absolutely. That's absolutely, that's exactly what my stance is too, is that I believe, like you said, he was probably a total fraud, but that doesn't negate the fact that there's still value in the books themselves. There's a lot of really interesting stuff and ideas, and
Castaneda is interesting, and the reason those books are good is because one, he what he did is he fraudulently, he was more of a storyteller, and that's actually the thing is like when I say it's like he ripped off so many people. When you look at things Don Juan said, Don Juan was apparently the most well-read Native American sorcerer ever, because like it was all ripped off from other places essentially. So that was one of the things, but he did. He studied shamanism, and like all the things in the book were actually based on actual shamanism. So a lot of the shamanism in the book or the sorcery as he was calling it, was legit, and the concepts are legit, and it's well written, so I'd highly recommend it. But yeah, no, the other thing is, you read about his sorcery and he's talking about this stuff, and here's the knock on Castaneda, in case your listeners don't know, is he basically used his fame to start a sex cult to himself. Like that's what he did.
Because why not?
Yeah, because he started a sex coven essentially. So he had all these, but yeah, why not? But
That's what Luke would do. He's nodding his head.
Okay, and I agree. This sounds cool, but what he actually did was he found poor women and completely separated from their family. All made them shave their heads, by the way, too, because he had a weird women with shaved heads. So he basically exploited poor women, intentionally separating with their family, and so he could start this weird sex cult. Which is, again, my point is, this is how you know he's a fraud. Like, this is not what, if you were legit, shaman or sorcerer, this is not what you would have done with your time. Like, obviously the guy was a fraud because he really just wanted to use fame to get laid. It wasn't really a spiritual thing to a large extent. But it gets worse, though, because, basically, again, he separated all these women from their family, and then he convinced them that he was never going to die and his body was going to vanish. And then he got liver cancer and died, and 3 or 4 of them committed suicide, essentially, because they were so upset about the fact. So, again, this sounds cool. Ooh, I'd want to start a sex cult yourself. But, women are people, and separating vulnerable women from their families for your own sexual purposes and then lying to them about your spiritual abilities to the point that they commit suicide when you die it's pretty shitty. Like, it's like the guy was a scumbag. He was a scumbag and he was a fraud. I still would recommend his books. I think that I don't think that takes away from his books at all. But he was definitely a scumbag and a fraud. That's for sure.
Right. Well, did it ruin your vision of him when you first found that out, or does?
Well, I think what's fascinating about this, and it's a weird topic. It's I can kind of seg this into some other something else I was thinking about the other day. But it's just, this is psychology. When I talk about earlier how I was summoned into magic. I was raised in Ohio, playing sports and playing guitar and stuff. Like, I'm a pretty normal guy, So when I started playing around with astral projection and having these really weird experiences, it completely went against what I was taught to believe and accept, and I couldn't. And so when this thing showed up and kind of just clapped its hands and unhypnotized me, it released this. And it's funny, I was talking about Castaneda because he talks about this in his book. It's concept that Graham Hancock talks about in his studies of shamanism as well. It's this concept called submission to a higher order of knowing, like a part of you that was raised to think that this was crazy and it doesn't make sense, like, kind of has to snap for you to progress. And that's sort of what happened to me. So I know, and I talk about this in my first book, like, I know how hard it is. Like, this stuff goes so against the grain. And this is something that we now know about psychology, is that if somebody has a deep held belief, it doesn't really, confronting them with facts and whatnot. And sometimes in my case, even experiences wasn't enough, because you live in society and people we're not really rational. We're incredibly conformist, and we need to start recognizing that, like, a lot of the stuff that we think of as rationality is actually conformity, and I was actually, so this is something I was thinking about the other day, that there are at least 5, I would come on a show like this and talk about magic and things like magic and sorcery. And really what we're talking about is the potentiality of the human imagination. And it seems that, the human mind, the human imagination has this enormous potentiality that's untapped. And for some reason, we're not studying this thing. And you say stuff like that, and people even like, oh, you're into magic. And like, that's crazy. And I'm like, actually, I can, like, off the top of my head, name 5 different completely scientifically affected things that absolutely point in the direction that the human imagination, like, that's an established science fact. And yet it's so hidden and it so goes against the way we live our lives. This so goes against getting up and going to a job and working, like this idea of tapping in and of spending time in your dreams. But yeah, just right now, like, number 1, you got psychedelic drugs. There's been more research going into this recently, but no scientist is going to deny that if you take psychedelic drugs, you're going to have most likely a very spiritual experience. This is what the research is increasingly saying, that this can cause, and what I would encourage anybody that hasn't really done psychedelic drugs is to, like, read some of these stories, like go to Arrowwood, some of these trials that you're like, read some of these people's stories, because it's very weird and very complicated. And especially in things like ayahuasca, we've shown that people are, reliving memories from their past and seeing how these things from their past are integrated with their future, and sometimes having future. And so there's this question of, how does the brain do that? How can the brain reproduce memories from the past? Because we know that it can, essentially, right? And that's psychedelic drugs. So then you got hypnosis. And again, what I would say is, look at the weirdness of hypnosis. It's like, you can make people, have spontaneous orgasms or think that they're drunk. And what's so funny is I took a class on hypnosis. So it's not something that I've been able to pursue a lot, because some people, it's one of the strange aspects of it. Some people are very easy to hypnotize. Other people not very easy to hypnotize. I unfortunately fall in the not very easy to hypnotize category. So it wasn't something that I pursued a lot. I've taken a couple classes. So that's number 2 potentiality of the human imagination, straight up scientifically accepted. open. Nobody's going to argue that psychedelic drugs or hypnosis. And then you got lucid dreaming. Lucid dreaming, again, people don't realize this has been scientifically proven. It's not just that people say they have lucid dreams. Scientists have conducted experiments, and this is like back in the 70s, where, you know, people actually communicated with the outside world, where a doctor was watching a person who was lucid dreaming, and they came up with eye movements to communicate to the doctor that, yes, I know that you're dreaming. I know that you're looking at me. So again, lucid dreaming, something the human mind can do. Very few of us pursue it. 4, you got meditation. The research on meditation is now coming forward. And again, think about what meditation is. This means that you can just think differently. You can think differently and program your mind to do all kinds of weird things, to kind of just reformat your mind. And it has all kinds of positive benefits. Nobody's going to argue with this. The science is out on this. Some people can even, like, you know, drop their body temperature and do this. Again, nobody can argue there's these people. It's been tested. And so that's number 4. And then number 5, you have so you got lucid dreaming, and 5 would be crap. I just completely spaced on. So that's 4 right out in the open. And then, well, of course you've got near-death experiences. God, I should have written this down the other day. I had a good 5. But so anyways, I just went through like 4 things right out. Oh, no, 5 is spontaneous brain injuries. I'm sorry. So there's this guy in Tacoma, and this has, again, been documented multiple times. And, you know, no scientist is going to deny that it exists. There's like a guy in Tacoma is a particularly interesting example of this, where he got kicked in the head coming out of a comedy show one day. And then all of a sudden he said, I'm seeing these crazy geometric, like otherworldly geometric patterns in my mind. And then this guy who has no drawing ability whatsoever is all of a sudden goes from having no artistic ability to drawing these amazing, like, geometric patterns out of nowhere. And this is,
isn't that
it's not
crazy?
Just
That is fascinating.
So there are 5 things that just straight up say the human imagination has this limitless possibility. It's all in the open. No scientist would even deny any of those things. I could keep going into things like near-death experiences.
Well, let me add too that all those that you just described are considered altered states of consciousness.
Well, exactly. Yeah. Right. Exactly. Yes, exactly. And for some reason, like, hey, you know, my books and stuff and what I do, and I talk about, you know, being a mystic or whatever. And this is what I do. Like, I explore these things. I've experimented with meditation. I've experimented with astral projection, ritualistic use of psychedelic drugs, which is a bit different than than just the recreational use of psychedelic drugs. And I can say that those are just recreationally using psychedelic drugs and ritualistically doing them are quite a bit different things. And now I've done dream journaling and kind of magic journaling, and then played around with kind of chaos magic techniques and stuff like that. And you know, all of those things have essentially worked, you know, like that's what, and weirdly enough, I was a Christian for, like, you know, from age, I don't know, 7 to 16. And I did the Christian rituals constantly, and none of that stuff worked. Christianity is literally the only spiritual practice I've tried that didn't really work. So we're in a strange place in science where we know that that there's enormous potentiality in these altered states of consciousness, essentially, in the powers of the mind, where it goes beyond the powers of the mind. I would say, and what my kind of work challenges is, in remote viewing challenges, is the idea that it's just somehow in the mind, that what is in the mind isn't connected to the exterior world. And as I was kind of talking about with my dreams earlier, it's like and most even philosophers, you know, psychedelic philosophers will still have that caveat. Well, you know, I'm not saying that it's real or it's not real. I'm like, no, I'm saying that what is in internal consciousness, in states of consciousness, is connected to external states of consciousness in weird ways that we don't understand. And I've demonstrated this myself. I mean, I've posted things publicly about dreams that have then come true at later times, and it's been public, so I don't know. And it's about very specific stuff that, you know, you can't say that, oh, you were just picking that up from some other cues. It's like, no, look at the dream and look at what happened. And it's really hard to say that these things aren't related. And of course, that's what, and you notice from the 5 things I was talking about, I didn't bring up remote viewing, even though I've experimented with remote viewing and got 3 for 3 hits in this one experiment that I did. So that was pretty weird. And I think that's really actually almost even more sound than some of the other ones, but it's just, there's been such a propaganda campaign against that. The second you bring it up, like it's like, I don't know, it's like 9/11 conspiracies. Like 99% of people are just going to be like, F you, how dare you suggest that that's actually legit.
Well, let me ask you this, Thad, about, you mentioned about being a medium. Now, is this something that you believe that has always been with you since you were a child, or do you believe that you have honed this ability from all the rituals and practices and the things that you have done over the years? Where do you think it comes from?
I think it comes from both. And that's why I would encourage, but it is strange because, like, the occult stuff, I was sort of summoned into that stuff. Like and that's just a weird thing. I mean, you can believe in the spirit world. I mean, I'm sure you guys have had kind of alien contactees, and this idea of me being summoned into the occult is actually a lot less weird than their stories, and a lot more pleasant. Like it wasn't like when I read about some like these alien contactee encounters, it's like that stuff sounds absolutely horrifying,
Right,
and
exactly.
I was talking about too, these experience of having these things pulling me out of my body. I couldn't do it. I tried. I really wanted to make it happen. I wanted to make that happen more than anything, but I couldn't do it because it was just so jarring, and the sensation of being pulled out of your body was so, just alien, for lack of a better term, and terrifying. So I do think it is a combination with somebody like me, but I mean, here's the other thing about psi phenomenon. When you look at things like remote viewing and like hypnosis, like I said, I can't really be hypnotized very easily. Other people can be hypnotized very easily. So that's kind of an ability. And remote viewing, all the research that went into that said essentially the same thing. It's just basically, and it's so funny that people don't like this, but, I don't know why people are confused by it, but I think that some people are just better at this stuff than others. And that means that it's like anything else in the universe, like some people are better at drawing than others. Some people are better at math than others. Some people are 6'8" and can play basketball. Some people are, so basically it's like psi, like anything else. I do think there are people that just have greater abilities at this stuff than your average person, just like anything else in life. And I think definitely I'm one of, I was in denial about this essentially. Like I didn't want to accept the fact that I was one of these people, but yeah, and it's been communicated to me too, that especially the spirit medium stuff that, it's been referred to me by the spirits that I do have a gift, and that is the gift. And again, this is one of those things you look in spirit mediums, that's just the way it's talked about. And if you look at the history of spirit mediumship, that's, what these spirits are telling me is essentially the entire tradition, is that some people just have this gift. But I think anyone could, just like, of course, I'm a huge NBA fan, so everything comes back to like sports references to me. But I think that anybody can play basketball, but I don't think, obviously I played a lot of basketball when I was young. I was never under the delusion that I would even going to play college ball, but does that mean that you shouldn't do it? Like, no, I mean, it was fun and, and it's good for you and it's good exercise. So that's sort of the way I feel about spirituality, just because, you're not necessarily going to be like, the top dog or like amazing at this kind of stuff. I really do think anybody could benefit. And actually, weirdly enough, I had a weird experience earlier in the week, which is something that I've been referred to before, which is essentially that we have this idea of why magic works. And I think a lot of magicians think that, you're kind of like bullying the universe around with the power of your will. And what was sort of communicated to me was that, honestly, you're sort of like a student. And if you pay attention and you try and learn, if you really start paying attention to your dreams, if you really start trying to say, hey, what is my subconscious mind? Or what are these things communicating to me? Like, what are these things trying to tell me? And you really open up this dialogue, that you're going to be rewarded. And maybe that's really all that magic is. It's like, it seems like things are going well and things are going well for your life, but really they're just like, hey, yes, we want people to start trying to figure this out and learn, and we're going to reward anyone that tries. That's the way they pointed it out to me. It's like, if you start actually trying to listen to, what your spiritual self is trying to tell you, we're going to reward you for listening to that, just because that's the game. It's a lesson. It's like a student. It's like you get good grades, you're going to pass the class, and we're going to move you up. So it's a completely different philosophy as to why. And this was just something that was communicated to me just over the weekend, and it was something that was reiterated and something that was told to me before. And, it was just like, that's fascinating to think that, magic isn't really about, pushing people around or kind of saying, I want spirits to do this. It is in a way, but ultimately it's just like, we just sort of reward anybody who's actually trying to learn, essentially, if you try, because so few people do. It's like, if you actually go out of your way to try and figure this stuff out, we're going to reward you for just trying to figure it out, essentially.
What's how do you feel do you feel that you've been rewarded in life?
I definitely, my life definitely. I mean, that was one of the more interesting things about getting into magic and how I was summoned, and talking about how, it was like, you have to accept this and you can use this to your advantage, something. And yeah, my life turned around like pretty much immediately. I got a better, like I said, I had been single, and I'd broken up coming out of like a long-term relationship. I was kind of drinking myself to death. I was doing it to kind of like want money. And yeah, I transitioned careers and instantly got like a way better career. I instantly like met the woman who would, so it was weird how quickly my life went from me being down to like being up, and like it swung around very rapidly. And I, and I'm still obviously, I still work a day job. I would like to get to the point where I don't have to work a day job. But the other thing I can say about magic is I was doing magic to try and make my art better and my writing better. And that, in that regard, it absolutely worked. I instantly, like, I left this one band and started another band that I think was way better and got way better reviews and was way more successful. And, you know, I never even finished a book before I got into magic. And now the Transmission from Outside Time is actually my third. It's the second I put out under my name. It's the second that you can buy. My first book, I don't even like very much, but I at least finished it, right? So yeah, and I mean, I can definitely say, yeah, it was kind of weird actually how much, and yeah, and financially too. I mean, just I transitioned careers, and yeah, I mean, it's. I've been doing magic 11 years ago, and yes, I'm in a way better financial position than I was when I started. So yeah, it is strange that yes, it was pretty significant how things turned around after this happened, which is sort of what the claim behind magic is, that you can use this stuff to better your life. But as say someone like a Bremen would say, and I point out, like, I really don't think that it works unless you're doing it. You can't be doing it for selfish reasons. Yes, you need to better yourself, but you need to be bettering yourself to better the world as a whole. That's the whole point. If you're not doing it for that reason, it's just going to blow up in your face. You know, if you're really just about, I want to be rich and famous or whatever, like you're supposed to be developing spiritually, and you're supposed to be thinking about the whole, because remember back to the Holy Trinity, you know, and I've had a billion visions about this, about how all consciousness is connected essentially, and that we all are essentially one story or one plot line. So, I mean, that's just the fundamentals of magic. You're not being selfish is not actually helping you. Like, you can think you're doing selfish magic, but it's not going to work because you're not. Like, you have to be thinking about the fact that you're connected to everyone else, and it's really what's good for the good of the whole is what's going to be good for you. And, you know, it's like, so, you know, it's not easy. You have to try and live up to that.
Yeah. Yeah, that makes sense. Let's talk about some of the things in the book.
Sure.
There was one interesting thing you kind of like, it's kind of a theme in the early part of the book, talking about some of the weird synchronicities of trying to adopt a dog.
Yeah.
It's several things with names and place names, and let's talk about that a little bit, because that was kind of fascinating.
I can pull that up. Yeah, I don't have to remember. Okay. So anyways, yeah. The part of this book covers, and yeah, I got to throw my dog. So I have an adorable dog, and I was part of this covers the point in my life when we were getting this dog, which is something we'd wanted for a while. And it was actually something I did a magic spell to try and get. And it worked out in a particular way, because we actually asked our landlord. We had cheap rent. My wife at school, we asked her, she said no. And then it just so happened that I renegotiated again because she asked to raise our rent. So I'm like, let me try and, renegotiate. And it happened just at the right time. And then looking back, it's like my wife and I, at the first time when she said no, we really didn't have time to get a dog. So this is again how magic works. And then that happened. We ended up getting the dog right when this band that I was in sort of broke up. So I had all this free time to raise a puppy, because puppies take a lot of time. So that was it. But yeah, there was synchronicities are something that I write about a lot. And my take on synchronicities is a lot different. I mean, weirdly enough, some more scientists are taking this stuff seriously, and they all think that's just seeing patterns. And I think really synchronicities are just the universe's way of pointing out to you that there's a narrative. And so much of, I'd say, what would be considered mysticism or magic is looking at the universe as being a story and being art rather than being, matter and this objective literalism. It's this more subjective and metaphorical way of thinking that we've sort of shut out. And so synchronicities are just the universe's sort of way of pointing out to you, like, look, there's a plot. Like, this isn't just random nonsense. Like, you are part of a story and part of a plot. And when you tap into that plot, you start to see that your life has a plot. And if I'm remembering correctly, the one weird synchronicity about my dog is that we brought him a UW, because we went to go out and meet him. He was like an hour away, and we had brought him a scent blanket. My wife worked at UW at the time, so we brought him a UW scent blanket. His name is we named him Ezekiel Ross, because Ross is my middle name. What
kind of dog is he?
And then he's a pug. He's a black pug.
Okay.
And so on the night we brought him this UW scent blanket and came back, Terrence Ross, who went to UW, won the slam dunk contest that night. And so we had named him Ross and gave him a UW thing. So that was just one of the synchronicities. I think it was even weirder than that, though, in that when we got the birth certificate, also the name Ross, one of his, I think like his grandpa had the name Ross in his name too as well. So it was just this very, and these are the kind of synchronicities, like, they don't add up. And this is another thing I talk about in the book on the I call it technological synchronisticism. Yet another thing that I read about that I'm like, it's like I really am in kind of like my own category, which is something I didn't realize. Like, I started writing and I was like, oh, I just assume that other people are doing what I'm doing. It's like, no, I'm doing completely weird stuff that no one else is doing. But one of the things that I did was called I refer to it as technological synchromysticism, and it's like I said, that synchronicity I just pointed out with the UW something like it. We never had time proving that, but the fact that we did go visit our dog, where we gave a UW a Semplake on the exact same day that Terrence Ross, and named him, Ross, and the exact same name that Terrence Ross won the dunk contest. He went to UW. Those kind of things are actually provable. Like that, we could demonstrate that, And so this is something that when I started documenting on Facebook, not only did I kind of provide a documentation that my dreams were predicting the future, but you can actually now track synchronicities. And, like Carl Jung had the classic like moth synchronicity. He was talking about a moth, and the exact time he was talking about a moth, this moth came up and flew in his window, and like every mystic throughout history has these stories, right? And they don't actually have to be just stories at this point. Like if you really start tracking like things and writing out your dreams and your visions online and whatnot, there's certain things that you can just prove flat out happened. It's just like if you document something on Facebook and then the next day the site that you look at like every day posts, the exact topic that you were talking about the day before, that's now not just like, that's not a random synchronicity. You can say this actually did happen. So I call it kind of technological synchromysticism. And I've been keeping track of more and more of those. And I should have compiled a list before I came on here. I got some good ones though. I do remember some. First of all, there's just some weird synchronicities in my life that I can prove. One is Carlos Castaneda, we were talking about earlier. So I grew up, again, in suburban Youngstown, Ohio, I had a half brother. My dad had remarried and I had a half brother. We grew up Christian, Episcopalian, actually. We went to an Episcopalian church. My half brother is 3.5 years younger than me. And so we grew up again, and it's my stepmom's son. My dad ended up adopting him. We never talked about shamanism or alternate spirituality at all growing up. As it turns out, after I moved out and went to college, I got into psychedelic drugs and started reading about this stuff. And so did he. And so, I do have a brother that lives in Peru and has been involved with ayahuasca shamanism. I grew up in the same house as this kid with me and my little brother. We both grew up as Episcopalians in suburban Ohio. And somehow two of us ended up practicing a more shamanic faith. Totally weird, totally provable. Here's another good one. There's a podcast on the Ohio one. The first podcast I actually ever did is called the Free Radical Media Podcast. And it was a weird point where I'd been writing a little bit for Disinfo. I was thinking about doing podcasts. I was like, I'm going to wait till my books are out till I do a podcast, which is another 3 or 4 months away. And so they contacted me out of it. Right when I was thinking about, hey, do you want to do a podcast? And they were like, yes. And so this is the first podcast I ever did. And they just randomly asked me, out of nowhere. And so I did it. And it wasn't until we were done doing the podcast and talking that we were like, oh, you guys are from Ohio? Oh, okay. And this is after we were done talking. This is like in the emails afterwards. It's like, you guys are from Ohio? Yeah. Not only from Ohio, they're from Youngstown, where I grew up. One of the guys, I sent him a book. He lives like half mile away from where I grew up. And one of the guys that I was talking to on this call actually literally went to my high school on this podcast. And so literally the first person who ever asked me to do a podcast, the first podcast I was ever on, were from people not from my hometown. And one of them actually went to my high school. Totally, completely true. None of us knew this until after the podcast.
Isn't that strange how things work out? Because I think I've said this story before, but like when we were in the Paradigm Symposium, when we went up there to Minneapolis, so we're doing interviews, and there's this lady there, Jennifer Stein, who she did the documentary about Travis Walton, right?
Okay, yeah.
And just through the course of speaking, find out that she's from the Philadelphia area. So my uncle lives in Philadelphia, and I just kind of ask her, do you know, my uncle, would give her my uncle's name, and she says, yeah, I do. I know him. But it's just because she had heard my last name and she was going to ask me. And I'm thinking just like, what are the damn odds that I go all the way to Minneapolis from Nashville and this lady knows my uncle coming from a completely different city? It's strange, huh?
It's strange, and like I said, it's pointing again this idea that there's a narrative behind life, that this idea that comes from kind of obsessive materialism or scientism that it's just cold dead matter and you know the universe isn't consciousness it's bizarre because humans we're stories. We create narratives around everything. So the idea that the larger universe is devoid of narrative is ridiculous. And so you have these things and yeah, I mean I can keep going. I'm going to go into one that's either very strange and then I'll give another one that's kind of more nuts and bolts because this is the other one that's strange is I read about this in my book. Thad McKraken is not actually my name. I still work day jobs and weirdly enough, this is something that I was told to do by the spirit world years ago. Was like, hey, you need to start writing under another name. This is way before anybody was even paying attention.
I was so hoping Thad McKraken was your name. I was really hoping.
So listen to this. So this is a very exactly. It's a great name. And so I created this name at complete random years ago. As it was like a PR thing for my band. I tried to make it like seem like the band's materials were coming from a PR guy rather than myself. So I invented the name Thad McKraken. And weirdly enough, I didn't want to write under a fake name. I was sort of told to do this. Like, hey, listen, this could get you into trouble. And weirdly enough, as I write about in my book, I did end up losing my job at one point and having to find another job. And when you're looking for a job, anyone in the age of Google like this, you wouldn't have to worry about this kind of thing before Google. But in the age of Google, if someone Googles you and all this stuff about like the occult and psychedelic drugs comes up, you know, that's not looking good. So I was told to write under a fake name and I did. Okay, so the fake name Thad McKraken just made it up out of nowhere. I think I knew a kid that was named Thad when I was like 5 and I thought it was a cool name. And for some reason, my brother and I thought McKraken was a funny last name. I don't know. When we were like in college, there was the McKraken Hall at Miami, Ohio when I went to briefly. And I don't know, for some reason we used to always just like get high and joke about that name. So I picked this name, Thad McKraken. As it turns out, one of my fans pointed out this to me. There is a guy who named Thaddeus McKraken, spelled one letter different, who lives in Detroit, Michigan, and he's heavily involved in Burning Man, and he's heavily involved in this thing called Theater of the Bizarre, I'm remembering correctly, which is a lot of occult-themed performance theater. So there is an actual person. I pulled this name out of nowhere, just made it up, and there's an actual person named Thad McKraken who is into psychedelic drugs and the occult. Like, I mean, you can't, and this is provable. Like, this isn't like and this is what I'm talking about, these provable synchronicities, like the ones I've been talking about. Like, I can demonstrate all these things. You could talk to the dudes in Free Radical Media. You could talk to my little brother who grew up with me. We never talked about shamanism once. Both ended up being into shamanism. There's a real guy named Thad McKraken who goes to Burning Man every year and does occult themed performance art with this fairly famous performance troupe in Detroit, Michigan. And it just
have you ever gone to Burning Man?
I haven't. No, I never have. Have you? Have any of you guys gone?
No, we never have.
Yeah, you know, I got to be honest. It's weird. As much as I love psychedelic drugs and I like psychedelic stuff more than the occult, I don't really like psychedelic culture, like the hippie festivals and stuff. This is why I've never actually done DMT. I've never done DMT because you apparently have to go to like hippie festivals to find that kind of stuff. Yeah, I've never actually done DMT, which Yeah, no, I know. It's like every time I bring it up, everybody like goes crazy about that. And it's just like, I don't know, man. Like I even know a guy that like booked, because I was when I was doing more music and, you know, I still do, it's more psych rock. So that's a different scene that just started. There's like Austin Psych Fest in Seattle now. And there's like most cities kind of have like a psych fest, but it's a much smaller thing. So like I was never into the hippie jam band thing or even kind of the electronic, like it's just not really my kind of music. So I think but it's weird that psychedelic culture has expanded to the point that there now is things like Austin Psych Fest. And there's even like Roadburn over in God, I can't remember where in Europe it is, which is kind of more the stonery doom metal. So I mean, psychedelic drugs were a lot more prevalent than people realize. And you know, there was people like me. I always thought it was weird because like I was interested in the stuff, but I never really. I don't like Fish. I don't like Grateful Dead. I don't like. You know, it was never my music. And well,
you don't like Fish, man? Come on.
No, I'm not a Fish fan. It's like the hippie jam band thing. It's like it's never, even though, yeah, I mean, I've been more of a psych noise rock, you know, type of guy than a kind of your traditional hippie, and it's weird, but yeah, no, I've never done DMT. I've never been to Burning Man. And, you know, weirdly enough, the main reason I think I do want to go at some point, but the main reason I've never been to Burning Man is like, man, I hate hot weather. Like I live in Pacific Northwest for a reason. Like I'm very warm blooded. I do not like high weather. Like it just seems like, man, I don't think that I would have fun because it's just so hot. Like,
yeah, because you got to go to like the middle of the desert for like a week, right?
Yeah,
like
that's
you stay in the middle of the desert for a week.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that's not my thing. You know, like I said, I live in the Pacific Northwest for a reason, man. I like it up here. I don't like boiling hot weather. I really don't. But yeah, no, I got to go to one of these festivals just to do a DMT one of these days, or have one of my fans give it to me because, yeah, no, it is sort of embarrassing at this point. But that's like one of the weird things that's become more and more trendy. And unfortunately, it's not easy to find, man. I found it once and me and my friend tried to smoke it and we smoked it wrong and we only had a teeny bit. So we got like a teeny little effect from it, but it wasn't like the full on DMT experience.
Yeah, you had Luke's approval when you said the stoner gloom metal or whatever.
Doom metal, not gloom metal.
Okay, doom metal, gloom metal.
Yeah, I went to like 3 different shows that were entirely 2 sludge metal fests, different years here in Murfreesboro, and then like several doom metal shows.
Nice. Yeah, no, and like it's funny. I mean, it's like I'm from Seattle, and I'm pushing 40 now. But growing up in the 90s, it was just all like the grunge stuff, and there was all like the stoner and doom metal was getting started out back then, and also electronic music, like weird stuff. So that was the kind of psychedelic music that I was into, and and even like Sonic Youth and kind of noise rockier stuff. So like really
right on
stoner metal, stoner music, and yet it was never the hippie kind of jam band stuff. And, weirdly enough, that it wasn't just me, because there are psych fests. Like I was involved with a couple psych fests in Seattle and whatnot there, but unfortunately it's not that big a scene. Like they're happening, but it's not, it's still kind of smaller level, but it's growing. So obviously there was a lot more people that are like me and like found psychedelic drugs very interesting, but didn't like the prototypical like hippie jam band kind of psychedelic scene. But
I want to hear some of the, one of the weirder stories in the book. Let's talk about something. Let's talk about something really weird that's happened to you.
Okay. Well, yeah. One of the weirder things is, and this is me I guess. Okay, so I guess I'm going to throw this in the weird category in that it was verified in reality. So I was talking about things that end up predicting the future. So I had this dream in, I believe it was June, and it's documented in this book about. And the dream was paraphrased and it was bizarre because I went through a period of years where I was having crazy dreams, and it's kind of subsided in the last year or so. And so it basically told me straight up at the beginning, like, this is a metaphor for working for a large corporation. And then I had this dream where I was in all with kind of all my coworkers who I was working with at the time. And we were on a plane that was going down into the Amazon, and that we were in the dark, and that nobody knew what was going on. It was just like, okay, you guys are in the dark. Nobody knows what's going down. The plane that you're in is going down, and it was me and my coworkers. And it was sort of like, yeah, they're just going to let you fend with yourselves as this plane goes down in the Amazon. There was another part of this dream where it was like this. I also had a new coworker in this dream, and this coworker, it was shown to me, was like kind of like an awful person. And so 6 months after this dream, I found out that the company I'd been working for 6 years had been bought out by another company, and we were going to be laid off in a year. So again, we were a part of like exactly like the metaphor in the dream of the plane going down, which again, the dream was prefaced by saying this is a metaphor for working in a large corporation. It was the exact scenario that was described in the dream. We were in fact all going down. I ended up working for them for slightly over another year after I had found out, because they gave us retention bonuses. So it was this like process of working for this company that was slowly going down. As it turned out, I did in fact, one guy left. I did in fact get another cube person who sat in the cube next to me. That guy did end up being a creepy kind of like neo-Nazi type dude, which I was the only one that found out about. So it was like, again, I can tell some weirder stories after that, but weird in the fact that it was one of like 4 places during this 1 year. One of the other ones was my uncle, where it's straight up like there's this dream that predicted the future, and I published it before that. And that was like 6 months before I found out about any of this. And any super skeptic that's just like, oh well, maybe you're faking it, and you were hearing things behind the scenes. I'd have to point out, actually, it would have been illegal. Like the way corporate culture works, like me to know anything about this merger would have been illegal. Like it would have been illegal for any of my bosses. One, they didn't know about it at this point, and 2, like, no, I couldn't have known about this. Like, it would have been illegal for anybody that I worked for at this time to actually tell me that this stuff was going on, because it leads to stock manipulation and stuff like that. So and I went to, and I can further go on this, and this is almost even more bizarre. There was another example where I really like the artist Paul Laffoley, and so I didn't even realize until I was going through my notes. A week before I went to Paul Laffoley's exhibit, which is the only West Coast exhibit that he's ever had, and he's a visual artist. Highly recommend anybody looking him up online. He's actually passed away, I think like a year or so after this event. So I had a couple visions. So a couple of days before I went to Paul Laffoley's vision, I had an idea, and it was a vision about me. It was basically floating out the idea. It's like, could you build a magic shrine to kind of like emphasize your magic. Like the idea of me creating like a holy space for myself, essentially, like that I could create this space that would help intensify my magic. Now, this happened a year before. So again, I had this vision. The next day, I go and see one of my favorite artists, or like a couple days later, and I had a pretty crazy vision there. Okay, I had no plans of starting my own space, like none. This idea would not germinate in my head. I had several visions, actually. I had even more after it. I was going through my notes again after this vision, leading up to this idea that I was going to create my own kind of indoor, kind of art shrine, essentially, my kind of spirit place for me to do my spiritual work. And about 6 months after this, my wife wants to buy a place in Seattle, which I didn't want to do. And again, this is where this gets confirmed. Like, I didn't want to. I didn't want to buy a place in Seattle. I didn't even think we could afford it, but we run the numbers. It's like, oh yeah, we can. It ended up being a really good idea because real estate in Seattle has gone completely berserk. So my wife was 100% right, but I was totally resistant to this.
Same here in Nashville, by the way.
No, yeah, no, it's not. I don't even, again, it's like my wife was totally right. And it's so funny because I have this all documented of like me in the spiritual states and like these entities being like, dude, I know you don't want to buy a house. Just trust us. Like, don't be an idiot. Like, your wife is totally right. But it's so like this is all documented. So anyways, we look around for a place. The idea was to buy a house. We realized in our neighborhood we couldn't really afford a house. So we're like, well, we could have afforded a house, but it would have been like a 600 square foot, basically the same size of our crappy apartment that we've been living in for years. So we decided eventually townhouse. We're looking at several townhouses. I wanted to buy one. My wife is like, no, I don't like that one. She made the decision last minute. The next week we find this other one that has a first floor office gallery space in it. And it's basically like I live in an art gallery. And I knew the second I saw it, like we walked in, this is not something I wanted to do. And of course, my wife is super picky. She loved this place too. So I was having visions about this idea of creating this art space, like where, kind of like my own kind of church or whatever, essentially, for lack of a better term, my own sanctum sanctorum, if you will. And then less than a year later, this is something that I had no intentions of doing. I didn't want to do on a conscious level, no desire. And I'm now talking to you from it right now. And again, this is stuff that can all be verified. Like, you could talk to a real estate agent who said, no, they weren't looking. Like, I not once during the process said, oh, I need to find a place where I can put up my art and like have my own art room. Like that was not even, it was in my subconscious states, but it was not even in my conscious mind at all. And in fact, my conscious mind was against the idea. And it wasn't until I even saw this place, but it was like this weird thing when I saw it, I knew like immediately. And of course, it's really competitive in Seattle, but of course we got the place, somehow miraculously. And yeah, it was just this weird, and of course my wife loved it too. It was just, so yeah, it's just these experiences. And why I said so yeah, that is weird in a way. I guess I could probably tell somebody if you want some more kind of like exotic stories. Yeah, and I keep going. I could tell a story about summoning a demon, which is a project I kind of took on because I'd never done work with that. That's a classic, magic. Asking a demonic form of intelligence to do your bidding essentially or help you out. Well, and I did that. Yeah,
I'd love to hear about some demon summoning.
I can go to that, and this goes past my book. I'm coming out with another book now, and I've just been working on this. So this is something recently. So anyway, but just to kind of wrap up that last bit. So there is this thing. It's like I have a lot of people talking smack to me online and being like, you can't prove this stuff. I'm like, well, actually, what is your explanation for this fact that I started keeping a dream journal and then 3 or 4 things in this dream journal in just the course of a year ended up coming true? And again, you have to look at the details of this. Like this dream that I had about my company going down, like I don't know how else you can interpret this kind of stuff. This idea that I'm going to have my own kind of art space, even though, and the fact that these things ended up happening and I posted them publicly first, you can prove that, it's kind of hard to argue with. And so, it keeps going. I have more examples like this happened a couple times since, and I'm going to have to write about it. One in particular, like I was told that I should start writing about politics in like March of 2016, when I was still just a Bernie Sanders reporter, and I always avoid writing about politics, but, I had no idea what was going to happen. And, so a year later, like I think 3 of the last most popular articles I've written were about politics, which is a topic that I never, wrote about before. But, so yes, the idea that I've actually, it's funny that there's this idea of a magic trick, and now I've actually done magic tricks where I have these crazy synchronicities that I can prove, and I can prove that my dreams predicted the future. So I never thought that I would be performing magic tricks, but essentially I have, where there are actually these things that it's like, well, my internal states of consciousness do seem to be tied to the external world in a way that I don't know what you're explaining, and like. I don't know how you explain that that's just random chance, especially when it's a person who's engaging in this mysticism and refer to, the potentiality of the human imagination. So, but okay, you want to go weird. We can talk about trying to summon a demon, because this is something that I also did in the year 2015. I've never done this before, but spirit medium, like, this is sort of what I'm being told to do. It's like, hey, you're supposed to summon, and it was a very specific demon named Enlil. So I had never done this. So I did a psilocybin.
Are you talking about the ancient Babylonian god?
Yes. I have been shown that I was connected to this Babylonian god somehow, right? And,
right.
Yeah, right. So and so it was pretty clear, and it was funny that in putting together, transmissions for Out of Time, I realized, there's a pretty consistent message coming through here, which is that you're supposed to be using your ties to whatever this entity is to, kind of help elevate the consciousness of the species, to, aid your magic. You're supposed to be using these ties. Like, these are abilities that you have. And so I'd never done it, until 2015. And it was 2/3/2015 where I did this mushroom ritual. This I actually just had gotten laid off and got these retention bonuses. So it seemed like, the perfect time. And so it was 2/3, which, by the way, I didn't realize until I'll bring this up later. So I do this mushroom ritual, and I'm like, okay, I'm going to do it. I'm going to say, hey, this entity, I'm going to summon you. You do my bidding. And so there's another thing. I made this movie called The Day I Achieved Contact, which you can watch most of on my YouTube channel. We're going to do a final theatrical release of it. So the whole point to this film, and this is the ritual that I was doing, was designed around watching this film that I made. And it's a cut up film that kind of takes a lot of my art and cuts it up with a soundtrack that we made. And it's based on kind of the principles of cut up magic, that when you put together cut up art, that something else can, like what Burroughs and say Geisen were referring to as a third mind, that something else can take control of the scene and help assemble this thing in a way. And it absolutely happened. We started off this project to just kind of make weird stuff to look at when we were playing live, like a lot of other bands do. And it turned into this 38-minute film that actually tells the story of this kind of sorcerer and cycles of karma and his relationships with women, which is something we weren't even trying to do, essentially. And it just kind of embedded itself. So this ritual that I was doing was designed, it was kind of like, hey, I'm going to summon this. And part of it was watching this film on mushrooms, which I'd never watched. I'd watched it when I was high, but I'd never watched it on mushrooms. So something happened to me when I was on mushrooms that has never, like, I've done mushrooms before. This has never happened. And so while I was watching this film on mushrooms, the entire my entire surrounding area, surrounding me, suddenly turned into a cave. Like, all of a sudden, and it's like I didn't want to look back at. No, I swear, this is so abnormal for my hallucination. So as I'm watching this film, like, all of a sudden, I'm looking around me, and all of a sudden, I'm in a cave, and I can see it out of my peripheral vision. I'm almost like too scared to look at it. And I watched this. It was super trippy. I summoned this demon. Weirdly enough, long story short, I had this other vision while doing it, where I was listening to some music I made, and the kind of whole wall receded, and I saw this valley with this powerful kind of solar image coming through into it. And it's just, again, something it would take me a while to get into, but the entire concept of the pentagram, and that the microcosm and the macrocosm, and that stars are actually living entities, and that's sort of what you're aspiring to be, which has been hammered home in my subconscious. So anyway, so I did this thing, and I asked this demonic form of intelligence to, hey, help me out. And then and so it worked, but in a really weird way. So over the next couple years, I mean, I got multiple kind of visions and dreams and whatnot about this entity. And it's weird because this thing is ultimately, you got the concept of your holy guardian angel and your holy guardian demon. And your holy guardian demon is kind of like, it's metaphorical for your mother and father. And, in the real world, like in this world, we have a mother and father, and essentially that's what I was realizing, and that ultimately this demonic form of intelligence is supposedly my spiritual father. And so everybody has basically a spiritual mother and father, which would be your holy guardian angel or demon. And again, this goes right back into magic. I had a trippy experience when I was reading the book of Abramelin, and he's talking about all of this. And that was like one of the big reveals I was going to do in my next book, is like, and this whole time I realized I was talking to this demon, it wasn't my holy guardian angel. And it's like, well, he actually says that right there, that you have a demon and an angel, and you're talking to both. And, it's this whole, again, these things permeate pop culture. And everybody knows the angel on one shoulder, or the devil on one shoulder, and that thing. And
right.
This is actually a metaphorical, this mystical concept that everybody has a spiritual mother and a father, and your guardian, demonic form of intelligence is your father. So I summoned him, and it was weird. It seemed like I've had continual visions, and here's the level of communication, because I've been talking to a demon, and this is so weird too, because like this stuff goes so against the PC kind of culture that I think everybody is sort of fed to believe. So I had a series of visions. I mean, even leading up to this. These were after this. That was basically indicating that there's a lot of people who are essentially, from the spiritual perspective, spiritually dead, and they're kind of coursing with black energy, and ultimately they're very much tied to the material reality, and that's what demonic forms of intelligence are. From what I've been shown, is it's more of this world. And so black magic is sort of more materialism in a way. So, and that's what's so weird, is that we look at this, we live in a society that worships black magic essentially, and yet we're like, that's evil stuff. And yet this is what we are all involved with. This is what our mainstream science with these communications technology, like this is black magic. It's all my way of saying it's like, it's not evil, but lots of visions basically just essentially showing me that okay, back to the ancient aliens. First of all, this demon Enlil that I've summoned to communicate with, is right. You guys are, I'm sure, familiar with, the Sumerian stuff and how Sumerian culture came out of nowhere. Right. Yeah. And just kind of appeared out of nowhere. Right. And oh, by the way, this demon Enlil there's a temple to him in ancient Sumeria. And I just started having like continual visions, just sort of explaining to me. I think the one is the most profound that I can have, was that years ago I had this acid hallucination about what I call in my writing the thousand-eyed God within, that it's just this multi-eyed entity. And I've always kind of wondered the meaning of it. And I had this vision where I was kind of the other side of this multi-eyed wall. And what it was happening on the other side of this multi-eyed wall is that it was like I was at, like a security camera room with security with like thousands of screens up. So it was like I was kind of watching all of these different portals. And each one of these portals was a passageway into the life of somebody that this demonic form of intelligence was controlling. And I was sitting here at the portal watching all these screens. And then they had an experience of like, I would look at one screen and say, okay, this screen needs attention right now. And so then I would fly into the screen. And when I did that, I would now possess this person. So now all of a sudden like quantum leap shit, like now all of a sudden I'm controlling this other person, and I take control of them for a period, and I affect this one aspect of their life. Of course, they don't even know that this is going on. And then when I'm zapped and I'm back, and I'm now looking at the security camera eyeball portal screens again. And then I go into another person's life and control that. And I had a vision, I come back, and also there was kind of like this black mist, and was kind of showing to me that it was later explained that this mist that was kind of reverberating when I was going in and out of these people's bodies involved depression and states of kind of despair and depression, which I'd actually experienced years before. I read about in my first book. I had this experience where I was told that I was channeling Satan, and then oh, by the way, I can do this kind of thing, but don't recommend this to other people, because like, you can handle this. You can handle this. This would destroy most other people. So like, don't tell. And I was even told like specific people, like, don't tell this person or this person to try and do this kind of thing. And so I channeled Satan in, and then the next day when I woke up after this, I was incredibly depressed, and I just like hated the world. But it led me to have this conversation with my wife that, needed to happen. So it was this lesson. And then so years later, I'm seeing it from the other side, like, we're looking at a screen, and this continues what this thing was showing me. Like, there's this mystery of how society came out of nowhere, and what it's been shown is that there's these things that we call, daemons or demonic forms of intelligence, and essentially these things can take control of thousands of people at once. Like, I was told up to 8,000 to 9,000 at once, and so like, I don't know how like accurate that is, because numbers seem to get lost in translation. But so there's essentially this idea that these demonic forms of intelligence are responsible. And this is what we communicated, like Western society, like these entities made Western society. Western culture came into existence by these things taking control of thousands of people at once, and basically creating civilization by taking control of thousands of people simultaneously. And these things are still around today and influencing our society to this day. But this is where Western culture comes from, is from these dark demonic entities taking control of Western culture or taking control of thousands of people at once to make people act in unison to kind of create the society that we know. And so, yeah, those are some weird stories. And also,
wow.
If you wanted weird, yeah.
That's wow.
So
that's a concept.
Yeah, no. And it's also, there's this other thing where this is communicating to me specifically, that there are these people that are really kind of materialistic, and they're like so gauged in the reality. And a lot of these people are very successful. But from the spirit world's perspective, these people are just like black like material energy. They're not even they're not like spiritual. Like they're almost dead is like the way. And yet these are the people that are, you know, like running Wall Street, and like they're like cogs. And so again, this is like the thing that you have these visions and you're like, like, you know, as somebody who's raised, you know, again, with this level of PC, this idea that like, I think they even said there was like a third of the population are essentially like these kind of like soulless robots who are just, I mean, like, I don't even know.
Well, Thad, you know, you that's not too dissimilar from Malachi Martin's concept of perfect possession. I mean, that's what you just, well, Malachi Martin had this concept of someone of perfect possession. In other words, someone is possessed by a demon so well that they are indistinguishable from the demon.
Yeah.
Like they don't even know they're possessed.
Yeah, no, I mean, and that's kind of what it was. Is that there's like, essentially there are pure people that don't really even have spirituality. They are essentially just completely material entities, you know, that they're essentially bound. And again, it's also the weird communication that often these people are very successful in life because they're very, you know, they're probably good at their jobs. They're probably very, and that was kind of it. It was communicated that these people are very meticulous. And that's what's so funny. This one particular vision, I was kind of like, so these people are like superior to humans? And the answer was kind of like, no, those people are like essentially dead to us. Like they are in a way. And like your culture, you're right. These are very effective people. But no, actually, like these people are like, that's sort of like a lower life form from our perspective. But, you know, and this is, you're getting into lower levels of reality and yet what I've been shown about, you know, kind of the spirit world and that we are in a lower level of reality. You know, this is hell or purgatory. And the more you go lower to like even, we're kind of like half spiritual entities, half, you know, just pure animals. But then you got, you know, other like lower animals. And that's what we would more relate to hell, these existences that are just purely dominated by survival instinct. And, you know, and that's what's so bizarre about humanity. I was talking about all these potentialities of the human imagination, and this is kind of like the God stuff, you know, and yet we're still so much half ape, and we so don't acknowledge that about ourselves, how much we are still just basically animals who are bound by basic primal desires and instincts. And I think the goal of spirituality, but we need to, as a culture, better acknowledge that our desire is to transcend that, you know, and it's like that we realize that that's what we want. We want to transcend these animal instincts. And yet there's unfortunately not much of a push. There's, I think, so much of a push to get people to adhere to these primal base instincts as a means to sell projects and to politically manipulate them, which is, again, sort of what I've been shown.
I think I'm going to post this show and I'm going to get like 36,000 emails the next day. Rob, Luke, was there anything that you guys wanted to add?
No, just that I agree with you. We need a mission statement as a species.
Yes, yeah. I mean, you know, I made the chart where we're kind of like half, you know, what I talk about too is like, we need to get rid of this idea of the science and the cold dead universe. It's a valuable way of thinking about things, but we're ignoring the fact that look at what has happened to humanity is like in the last 100 years or so, we have become so much more of an art centric species. Like we spend so much more of our time playing video games and like this stuff that our lifestyles didn't even exist. Like, I mean, there's now a gajillion TV shows and albums and God, video games are like so much bigger than they ever were when even I was growing up. Technology has changed so fast and we're not communicating with memes and, you know, and so we have become so much more art centric. We've become, you know, half ape, half art. And we need to really think about like, what do we consider evil? We sort of consider this primal stuff evil, you know, and we need to really think about like, how do we better transcend this? How do we become all ape or all art, no ape, rather than half ape, half art? Because I think the art part of us is accelerating at a part where the ape part of us is still like, hey, you know, come back, you know, not so fast. And you're absolutely right. We need to really start conceptualizing this stuff better. But anyways,
maybe that's what Bigfoot is. He's like the manifestation of our ape-like form.
Very possible.
I think we'll leave it there. Thad, cool. Tell everyone where they can contact you and also where they can get the book.
Yeah, the book is called Transmissions from Outside of Time, and it's on Amazon. If you look up my name, Thad McKraken, again, Transmissions Outside of Time. Check it out. Yeah, it's a lot. It's a kind of year in the life. It's basically a channeled book, year in the life of this knowledge and conversation with my holy guardian alien. And yes, the stories that I told tonight, definitely it's just as weird as you would think. I wouldn't have published a book of a bunch of dreams if these dreams weren't incredibly weird. And in fact, I really haven't gotten back to the point where I've been having that level of dreams since. So yeah, it's definitely a good book. And you can check me out on Facebook, Thad McKraken, Thad Thaddeus.McKraken is my Facebook page. I'm on Twitter, at Thad McKraken, at Thad_McKraken, and also DMI TV on YouTube. And I swear I'll actually have a regular website one of these days, but now I'm on like every platform. But
yeah, we have a website, but we got several as well. Well, thank you so much, Thad. Stay on the line for us, guys, and we'll close this section out on Conspirinormal. All right, guys. I am kind of exhausted after that one. As I knew I would be. What do you think? What did you think, Rob?
Oh man, I love Thad. I love having him on. He's just one of those, like, you probably could have just like sat back and just let it roll for the whole interview. He would have totally taken charge. He's great that way. Like, no shortage of stories. There were those little pauses though that I knew I kind of had to step in. Yeah. And he said some things that I was like, I just wanted some clarification on, like, for sure. The medium stuff and what that meant, and had to get a good like demon conjuring story out of him for sure. What he said at the end there about the demons possessing 8,000 to 9,000 people at a time. That was fascinating, and keyed back into some of the perfect possession stuff that we talked about with Malachi Martin. Yeah. What do you think, Luke?
Dude, he touches on some things that
chew your food.
I'm chewing and talking at the same time. I could do that,
He's efficient, Adam. We talked about this.
I'm working with efficiency. Anyway, yeah, dude. Sometimes when I'm just like at work and my mind will like drift off and I'm not even thinking about frying.
Yeah, you're watching the fries, you're drooling into the grease.
No, well, I mean, my mind is always elsewhere, and like Thad brings up things that we all, or at least me, like I'll think about, just in my spare time, mundane chores throughout the day, and I think about all these things, but I don't go as far as like writing a book, writing notes down and stuff like that. So, there at the end, he was talking about conflicting viewpoints about, like, or the devil and the angel on your shoulder, and like the conflicting viewpoints. Like, I feel like we all have like this, especially man, like has this beast inside him, and it comes out whenever you get drunk or you take psychedelics or something like that. Like, you can no longer tame it and control it, and it kind of takes over you, and you're no longer civilized, And
do you think that comes out in an aggressive way though with psychedelics, or is it more of a?
It depends on the person.
Laid back kind of way.
Depends on the person or what their current state whenever they do whatever it is that they're doing, whatever drug it is that they're doing, their current mood state that they're in. It kind of like expounds on that.
Yeah, more often than not, though, I think that it kind of pushes people more into the spiritual and away from the physical, at least with most psychedelics.
Yeah.
I mean, other drugs, like obviously, alcohol or whatever, even marijuana, though, tends to move people, I think, away from the primal and more towards the spiritual.
Right. Sometimes it can, in my experience, it can like accentuate, like if you're in a bad mood. And I would go to like, get super high, smoke several bowls, and that bad mood would get even worse.
Really?
Yeah.
Like it wouldn't calm you down as one would think it would?
Right, exactly. It just made me angrier.
Yeah, I've had bad trips for the same reason, just in a, not in a good environment, not in like a positive space or whatever. And yeah, it can get ugly fast. I also like that whole duality. That's very much like along the lines with a lot of the Celtic pagan stuff with the duality of nature, and you got light versus dark, and male and female and the god and the goddess. And
Right. It's just like for me, it's just there's always this conflict in my head.
Yeah, I think as in everybody has that, like that whole duality there.
Yeah.
You know, we all have that, you know, the good and the bad, and I think it's just depends on how you balance it.
Yeah, and like many times throughout life, I keep finding myself being hypocritical. You know, I'll like preach something in 1 year, you know, and then a couple of years later, I'm doing it, or to just take something simple like a style of music that I used to make fun of, or something like that, and then a couple of years later, I'm listening to it and like jamming out to it, or, you know. I don't
know if that's necessarily hypocritical, as more of just like how you would change. Like hypocrisy is more like you say something and then immediately go and do exactly the opposite.
I guess I'm being contradictory then.
Yeah. Or maybe you're just developing as a person. You know, I don't know if that's necessarily hypocrisy.
No, that's a good thing.
Luke, I do understand though that you started a little cause here locally. Yeah,
I attempted to. I don't. So you know, I've got all these hippie friends. Ones that vape and, you know, smoke weed every day, wake and bake. Yeah, what's up, bro? You know, and wear bright, colorful hats and whatever. So, you know, I figured that they would all be down for my cause. I called it Clean Up Nashville, simply. Like, I just want to go to my favorite lake spots, and, you know, I'm attached. This is my home. Like, I'm attached to the nature areas around here.
Sure.
You could find peace and serenity without having to drive like 30 minutes to an hour outside of Nashville to go, you know, walk some trails out in the country or something. Like, the lake for me is that quick, like, down the street getaway whenever you want some nature.
And we have the greenways and stuff around here too.
Right. And those are pretty clean, actually. Everything around and they're also regulated.
Right.
But I like to go to the spots that aren't, especially during the summertime. We got overpopulation problem here in Nashville. You know, there's people everywhere. So I like to go to more private lake spots to hang out, and they're trashed. There's trash everywhere.
Yeah.
You know, so I put that group together to hopefully get some people to come help me clean one of the unregulated trails. And
you got a lot of response on Facebook.
Yeah, everyone, oh, I'm down. You know, hit me up anytime. Let's do this. And I'm the only one that ended up at the event.
That's too bad. I thought that was really cool. Like, you know, you did it at a day that I was working.
Oh,
but
yeah, and I think that's with most people too. I don't think the 100-something people I invited are all just like lazy asses. I think that they just had other like, you know, obligations for that day. I mean, it was a work day, so.
Right. Yeah, it was a Friday. And I think maybe you've done it on a weekend. But, you know, some people do like to just talk about stuff and not actually take any action, not actually do anything.
Hey, look at me, everybody else. I'm down for this.
Right. Guys, we'll leave you with this. Had some feedback on the show, and this is from a rather new listener. And he writes on our Facebook page, he writes, "Oh man, haha. I've been listening through some older shows from 2016 and then bouncing back to current when a new episode comes out. And I keep hearing you guys talk about Luke. And I'm like, who's this Luke guy they keep making fun of and saying is missing? I'm jumping from old to new. I think I got through like 10 to 15 shows in a few weeks of listening before I finally heard the guy's voice. Seemed very fitting that on the show itself, it appeared you had some sort of mythical entity that rarely appears."
I'm very mythical. Legends will be told.
I love that.
And passed down about me for generations.
It's fitting. So not only is he supposedly the co-host, but he's our mythical entity now that we have to appear.
And cousin lover.
Well, we won't go there.
Off air conversation.
But you are from Watertown, but you know, Watertown. All right, guys. Rob, before we go, tell everybody once again about Patreon. We're gonna make them sick of it.
Yeah, we have a growing Patreon community, and we want to thank all of you guys who have signed up. And if you haven't signed up, you can go check it out at patreon.com/Conspirinormal. There's different tiers where you can contribute, and it's a sort of you get a little extra. You contribute to the show, we give you a little extra. We do bonus episodes. There's a tier for T-shirts on there, and lots of other little things that you can sign up for. Go check it out if you want to get involved. If you just want to do a one-time donation, you can do that through our website at conspirinormal.com. And all the other links are on the website as well. So check it out.
And we're getting T-shirts.
We are getting T-shirts.
Just ordered them today, actually. So next time, guys, we have Dr. Heiser coming back on. We're real excited about that. This is continuing first of all, it's Easter coming up, and we're going to talk about his book, Reversing Herman. And
wait. I want to predict that we're going to have this amazing conversation about Holy Blood, Holy Grail at the beginning.
Yes, we were going to have this amazing conversation that took place in the past, but you will hear it in the future.
Yeah.
Something like that. I don't know. We talked a little bit about time travel movies too.
We did.
In this time travel episode. But Micah Hanks is the Doctor, so he's Doctor Who. But
right.
we're just
he'll explain it all to us.
He lent
later.
us the TARDIS for a little while, and we went back in time. So, guys, thank you for listening. Also, guys, having Dr. Heiser on, we're gearing up for the conference in Roswell, Guy Malone's conference. You guys want to check that out? We'll have stuff on the website about it and on the Podomatic. And thank you guys so much, and we will be back next time on Conspirinormal.
Cousin Love.